back now, I say it is just as well that I did what I did. I am satisfied with what I was able to do, even though it was at a price. My nose was fractured by the captain, but the most hurting thing was to be asked to expose my historical images which I had taken in Alexander Township. This was more hurting than my broken nose. I knew that my nose would be repaired, but the images I would never get back.
Through the power of the lens, we remember the class of '76. With these images, we recall youthful faces, brave young people marching. We are reminded of what they stood up against, what many of them died for. Had it not been for the weapon of photography and the determination of one man, many of us would have forgotten how we earned the democracy we so enjoy today. The man is Peter Magubane. This is the story of how his photographs helped the students of 1976 change the future of South Africa forever.
He was one of the top person and working for Drum, and then of course internationally at a later stage he achieved great recognition with his work.
He had a very strong-minded approach, and he wasn't a sort of a sociable person in the newsroom. He always appeared to me to be a bit of a loner.
Born in 1932 in Vredendorp, Johannesburg, Peter Magubane was raised in Sophia Town. His beginnings were humble, with very little to suggest that he would grow up to become one of Africa's most accomplished photojournalists. It all began with a gift from his father and a few issues of the famed Drum magazine.
My father brought me a camera from his rounds, a Kodak Brownie. But that did not make me think I'll be a professional one day.
But what really was the situation in 1950, there were, very unfortunately at that time, no black photographers I know of who'd worked for magazines or newspapers or did what you call photojournalism.
I began to read Drum magazine and see the pictures that illustrated the stories that were done by the Drum reporters and Drum photographers.
Drum was maybe the only paper at that moment in the early 50s that actually catered for the black public.
Pictures of beauty queens, soccer, pass raids.
It was jazzy, it was enthusiastic, it looked at entertainment, it looked at music, at sport, but very much so at the injustice of apartheid.
Those are the things that pushed me, that showed me who I am, what does the government think of me as a black person. I didn't have any rights as a black person, you know.
We were really sort of rock bottom of society, you know, the guys who were not really wanted, you know, these guys, they were black people, you know, don't talk to them, have nothing to do with them.
I had friends there. One was a young, brilliant photographer, Bob Gosani.
An extraordinary man. At age 17, Bob Gosani joined Drum as a switchboard operator in 1952. 2 years later, he was producing some of Drum Magazine's most memorable photographs.
Bob Katani was extremely talented. I think extremely outstanding as a photographer. I mean, he produced some amazing images.
I asked them whether there was a vacancy for someone to lend. They said, well, at the moment there isn't. But would you mind a driving job? And I said, as long as I have my one foot inside, I'll be satisfied.
And then one day, after he'd been there for a few months, he came to me and he said, you know, this whole thing is ridiculous. I'm going into this situation. Why don't I also take some pictures? I'm very interested in photography and so on. So we got him a camera, and he began to go out on events and photograph side by side with the photographer. And then eventually we decided, well, what's the point of sending him a photographer? He can take the pictures, you know. That's the way it worked. I think Peter took to photography like a, what do they say, fish to water or whatever. He was very enthusiastic, and he picked it up extremely quickly because obviously he had the talent and he had the eye and has the eye.
All I was interested in was to be a good photographer one day. I didn't go home after work. I would stay at work and just go into town, do available light, and come back and process, sleep in the dark room, because 9 o'clock black people could not be seen moving around in town. Photography, when you're in the dark room making a print, it is like a woman giving birth. You know, you put the film in the enlarger, and you look down there, you see a human being or you see an animal. Then you put this into a dish of what looks like water, it's chemicals. And what do you see? An image is born.
Drum Magazine was founded by Jim Bailey in 1951. It gave voice to the black community who were unheard and unseen in the mainstream South African media. Drum Magazine was one of a kind and, unsurprisingly, operated in a world unto its own.
The drum office was a sort of an island in a rather unpleasant society.
We used to have roaring parties at Jim Bailey's farm and have great fun there. Get there on a Friday and come back on Sunday afternoon, you know.
The drum guys, we were all quite heavy on drinking and so on, and he was one of the fortunate guys who didn't ended up drinking. A very sober person, and that I think was very good. I think photographers also can't as easily afford to start drinking as writers can.
I would take a long glass, have a double. That double, for 2 hours, I will have the same double. By the time we leave, I'm still sober. I was just concentrating on my work.
Outside the offices of Drum, life was another world, particularly for black photojournalists like Peter Magubane.
Those days, we didn't use long lenses. You know, you used mostly a 35mm lens and a 105 lens to avoid the police seeing you, that you are there taking pictures. Those are the cameras that you're using, because you could keep them underneath your dust coat or your jacket, and therefore no one could see that you're a photographer. You know, you are satisfied with one shot, and you know that you've got that shot. It's the shot that will make the story.
And obviously, when there were demonstrations or there were activities where the police was involved, they didn't like to be photographed, and especially not by black photographers. And among many, Peter Magubane was very often arrested and pushed around and so on.
No one dictated terms to me. I remember one assignment in Zeerust. The press was banned in Zeerust, but Drum went in. Drum did not believe in being dictated to. When we got to Zeerust, because we knew that the press was not allowed, we were dressed like, ordinary farm people. I went to the nearest shop and bought myself a half a loaf of bread, scooped the inside and put my camera in there. I kept on taking pictures. Drum magazine was the only one that had pictures of what happened in Zeerust.
It was the first or second day of the start of the treason trial at the drill hole in Johannesburg. And every now and then there were crowds attempting to demonstrate against the police and so on, and the police did a baton charge. And they got Peter into a doorway and started beating him. And I did a crazy thing. I saw red and I jumped on top of the cops. I took a dive and tried to stop them, which they did, of course, and then they arrested both of us and locked us up.
The tenacity of photojournalists on Drum magazine often paid off. Undercover, Peter photographed the humiliation endured by black men in prison. Stripped naked, herded together like cattle, black male prisoners were forced to undergo regular dehumanizing physical examinations. Exposed through Peter's photographs, the resulting public outcry put a stop to this humiliating practice. In the mid-1950s, a photographic exhibition from the Museum of Modern Art in New York came to town. Entitled The Family of Man, the exhibition had a profound effect on Peter's work.
The pictures were so different from the pictures that I take. I looked at these pictures, I said to myself, if man can do this, why can't I? I began looking at the pictures and trying to achieve what these men have achieved.
As a maturing photojournalist, Peter recorded daily the injustices perpetrated against the black community by apartheid. And then came Sharpeville. On the morning of March 21st, 1960, Peter accompanied Robert Sobukwe, founding president of the Pan-Africanist Congress, on his historic walk through Soweto to Orlando Police Station. He photographed the PAC leadership, having deliberately left their passbooks at home, demanding arrest in their countrywide campaign against the pass laws. Camera in hand, Peter then moved on to the Sharpeville police station, where hundreds of protesters had heeded the PAC's call. The police opened fire. 67 people were killed, many of them shot in the back. Hundreds were injured. It was a turning point in Peter's life. His photography would never be the same again.
Well, I got emotionally involved. As a result, I shot from a distance. I did not do any close-up shots. As a result, I got a rebuffing from Tom Hopkinson, who said to me, you have pictures, historical pictures, but what you don't have is something to sell a newspaper. I would have loved to see a bullet in someone's thigh or someone's feet or shoulder blade. And he said, in this job, you don't get emotionally involved. If I didn't think that you would make a good photographer one day, I would have fired you right away. I learned my lesson. I had to move on and change my style of shooting and not to be emotionally involved.
Egos and ambitions aside, drum photographers never lost sight of the most important element of their work:
I would have thought, like anywhere else, we would compete with one another. There was both. There was a competitive spirit, who would produce the best image, have the most pictures in the magazine and so on. That's quite natural. But on the other hand, we all had a purpose in a way, and we all had the same aim. And this is very likely why we were all there, to bring to the surface the injustice of apartheid as journalists.
In the 1960s, things began to change at Drum magazine. Tom Hopkinson, the editor who believed in the power of Peter's photography, stepped down. It was time for Peter to move on.
Drum was no longer the Drum that I knew. It changed. Some other editor took over from Tom Hopkinson, and Drum changed from what it was. Drum used to do stories on witchcraft, stories on 007, stories on the Beatles, and that was in Drum.
Leaving Drum, Peter traveled and furthered his career overseas. Returning to South Africa, he joined the Rand Daily Mail, where he worked as a freelance photographer for this progressive and liberal newspaper.
I came back. I freelanced for the Mail in 1966, and I was on the staff in 1967. They knew where I was coming from. They knew my work. I got support from Raymond Lowe, who was a fantastic editor.
A very dedicated photographer, determined, strong-minded. He went out and initiated his own stories, and he had a very good news sense. His general approach was to tell the story of how Africans were being treated under the apartheid system.
Raymond Lowe said to the reporters there that there is no assignment that is big. There is no assignment that is small. If he must do the assignment, let him do the assignment.
The editorial line was strongly anti-apartheid, and the strongest point of the Mail throughout its history was that it went for the news, no matter what the side effects of that news was likely to be.
Back in the field, as a black photojournalist in apartheid South Africa, police harassment was once again a daily challenge for Peter.
In those days, photographers used light meters, and he had his light meter. And when the police became threatening, he said, I must warn you, this is a radio device which enables me to communicate with my office, and it's on now, and if what's going on here is being recorded. Well, they didn't inspect the thing. It was just his light meter. But if they were going to beat him up, they stopped.
In 1970, Peter Magubane was banned by the South African government. His banning order restricted him from working for 5 years. He was put in solitary confinement for 586 days. No one had ever been detained for that long before.
I just think that they imposed a banning order on him on one particular day. We didn't have any idea as to what was the incident that triggered it. I think it was a general dislike by the authorities of the work that he was doing, the kind of pictures that he was taking and we were publishing.
I was merely doing what I see with my eyes, exposing the system in this country. I was getting rid of the shackles on my feet and my hands and the shackles of black South Africans here. And therefore, I used my camera.
They wanted to stop him from taking pictures showing the iniquities of apartheid, so they banned him.
They put me on 3 bricks measuring a foot from the ground for 5 days, drinking strong black coffee without sugar right through the night. The 5th day I collapsed. They gave me tablets to relieve myself. But I didn't think that I was the only one that was suffering. There were people that were crying at night, dead of night, being tortured. The torture that they gave me on the bricks was very mild, because they knew that the Rand Daily Mail was watching out for me. If they did anything, the Rand Daily Mail would find out and would be on their backs.
Well, no specific charges were ever brought against him.
During his banning, Peter survived through the support of Amnesty International. 5 years on, camera back in hand, Peter Magubane was even more determined. His rage as an oppressed black man, witness to constant horror and injustice, once again made his camera a deadly weapon, a weapon that would eventually shoot apartheid stone dead.
When 76 came, I went in there like a wounded tiger. I had not been working as a newspaper person for 7 years because I was detained, kept in solitary confinement for 586 days, and I was banned for 5 years. So when I came back, I was hungry. I wasn't going to run away and say, no, this is not for me. Especially after what I did in Sharpeville, I said to myself, here there is no one that is going to move me away from here. The only thing that can move me from here is death. What I saw was a poster, Star newspaper, saying, students to march tomorrow. I didn't think much of it, I just said, well, this is some news. But it has to be covered.
By 1976, Peter Magubane was a seasoned photojournalist, having cut his teeth on Drum magazine in the 1950s, detained and banned by the South African government for 5 years in the 60s. Back in the field, Peter was working his 10th year at the progressive and anti-apartheid Rand Daily Mail. Over the past 20 years, he had witnessed and photographed almost daily the injustices suffered by black people in this country. At Sharpeville in 1960, he had learned his toughest lesson as a photographer and journalist: never get emotionally involved. When June 16 came, Peter was ready and more resolute than ever before. Controlled by apartheid, white journalists needed special government permits to enter the townships. As a committed black photojournalist, Peter was there.
I started with Orlando East, where I saw a large contingent of policemen and soldiers. And I left the police station, I went into Soweto. That's when I met the first group that was marching from Narrated High School. When I tried to take my third picture, I saw that they didn't like it, because I could just tell with the way their hands were going, say, go away, go away. I took 2 pictures. I was running backwards, running backwards.
Behind him were the police, and he was in between and taking pictures of the kids, and the kids wanted to attack him. They obviously were concerned at the fact that their pictures would be recorded and therefore could be used in evidence against them.
I stopped and I said to them, a struggle without documentation is no struggle. Whether you win or lose, it's no struggle.
While very conscious of the fact that behind him were police who were not very impressed with what he was saying.
Someone from the back said, oh yes, I know him. So I said to them, I plead with you again that you let everybody in, not just me, black and white, yellow, green, blue, let everybody in, let them record this. They let us in.
It may be hard for some of us to turn the clock back and understand how a peaceful march became one of the most callous and violent events in our history. Soweto students were protesting against an inferior and racist system of so-called Bantu education. More specifically, they were objecting to being taught in Afrikaans. At the time, South Africa was a police state. The government did not entertain dissent. They opened fire and killed.
Instead of allowing the demonstrations to go on, they in fact tried to stop them and curb them, and as a result, there was the conflagration that occurred.
When word got out to say someone had been killed, a 13-year-old boy was killed, Soweto changed. You saw flames all over. Government houses, government cars, anything that was government was burned down. Cars coming from town, from white Johannesburg, were burned down. The kids were angry.
One was in a very difficult situation. You couldn't, for instance, support the mayhem and the destruction that was going on. But you could feel a sympathy for the reasons for it. It wasn't just indiscriminate disruption of a kind of a hooligan element. It was in fact people with a real grievance, and that the grievance was not only the issue of Afrikaans in the schools, but it was of the discrimination that was practiced generally.
Compared to the conservative mainstream media, the Rand Daily Mail gave a starkly different analysis of what was happening during the student uprising.
The Afrikaans papers obviously condemned the student rioting as that of indiscriminate mayhem, etc., from irresponsible people. They didn't list the grievances, certainly not, and they just condemned the demonstrations out of hand.
June 16 was only the beginning. Soweto was not the only place affected. As witnessed by Peter, the slaughter in Alexandra Township was even worse.
Now, 17th, I moved to Alexandra Township. Alexandra Township was different. The police went in there with a vengeance. They didn't use tear gas, they didn't use rubber bullets, they used live ammunition. I saw them open fire on a man who was sitting in the toilet doing his own things there. They hit him stone cold. Whilst I'm standing near the beer hall, there were two women saying, "Power, power." A bullet oozed past my ear and went through this woman's stomach. As one man was passing with his car, they hit him stone dead. The car overturned. I saw a guy who was holding a brick on his right hand and holding a rubbish bin lid. Hit. He was stone dead. Those images were horrific, you know.
One was always used to that kind of production from Peter, that if something had happened, one would get actually to the core of what was happening through the pictures of Peter.
In January 1976, 4 months before the student uprising, television came to South Africa. As with radio, television was unapologetically controlled by the apartheid regime. It soon became the most powerful weapon in controlling the minds and shaping the viewpoints of the white South African electorate. When Soweto erupted, the SABC knew exactly how to tell the story, painting a picture of mindless, undisciplined rebel going on the rampage.
Devastating Soweto riots and their aftermath have shocked South Africans, black and white, into hard recognition of their country's complex race relations. In and around the townships and shantytowns, pupil power, black power and rampant hooliganism have exploded into a bloody conflagration which has so far left over 100 dead and which will cost the country an estimated 50 million rand. Justice Minister Mr. Jimmy Kruger has appealed to blacks to accept the whites' good faith and told whites that the responsibility for good race relations rests with everyone. Soweto will take long to recover.
So what happened on that particular day, we went in early in the morning, myself and a camera person. We thought it was quiet, but then soon when we entered Soweto, We saw hundreds, perhaps thousands of kids marching down the road. I advised the camera person actually to take a turn off. He said no, he wanted to get closer, and then eventually we saw, no, well, there was a great march going on, and then he decided to turn. But as he was doing so, someone from the side of the road actually threw a stone at him, hit him on the head through the window, and he lost control of the car. I then tried to steer, but eventually the car came to a full stop at the side of the road. I tried to pull him away from the steering wheel so that I could take over, but then I saw that he actually broke off the key in the ignition. And then there was only one option, and that was to run. Luckily, there was an off-duty policeman, a black person, who saw us, drove in front of us, threw open the doors, we jumped in, and he took us out of Soweto. So it was a lucky escape and a most traumatic experience for us. And then, of course, I was asked to tell the story, and that was part of the news coverage of the day.
In that news broadcast, what the SABC was showing were the violent masses, the sort of the rabble. There was no analysis or kind of explanation or justification of perhaps the grievances or the justification of why this had happened.
We all know now, looking back, that at the time, of course, the SABC was a public broadcaster but also a state broadcaster, and therefore the information that we had within the restrictions of the time was basically that given to us by the police.
We definitely knew who controlled the SABC. We definitely knew that it was the government mouthpiece. Television did not show whites anything that they did not know. It was there to reinforce what they kind of were comfortable with.
There were newspapers like the Rand Daily Mail, of course, who took a fairly hard line against apartheid. Some of the others did not. All the journalists of the time were subject to the same kind of media laws and restrictions. So none of us, irrespective of your own feelings, could really report the story as it was.
By contrast, within the state broadcaster at the time, a small band of concerned documentary filmmakers tried to produce a program giving meaningful insight and analysis into the causes of the uprising. The SABC was not impressed, and their efforts were thwarted with contempt.
When 76 happened, the English documentary department, and there were some very experienced filmmakers, I remember a delegation going to Don Briscoe, our organizer, saying, okay, we should be in there. We should be actually analyzing the situation and actually making a series of documentaries to try and understand what's going on here. Don's reaction was to say, no, look, this is the domain of news and current affairs. This is not for us as documentary filmmakers. The senior producers pursued it further. They didn't take that lying down. There were 4 or 5 of them that sat down and actually put together a very strong proposal about a series of documentaries on Soweto and obviously the unrest that was unfolding. That went up to management, and management came back with the decision that there was not one producer in the English documentary department who was experienced or responsible enough to undertake to do such a documentary series. The producers were absolutely outraged. And I know that at least one producer got up there and then, walked out of the room and resigned and never came back.
Peter Magubane was among the brave that defied the laws. Nothing was going to stop him from telling the truth about what was happening in his country. For the next 2 years, the uprisings, the violence and killings spread throughout South Africa. Peter would not be silenced.
They killed. Yes, I saw so many people killed there. I couldn't let that go and put my cameras away and say, no, I'm afraid. I was prepared to die. As an oppressed person, it was my duty to go there and record. If I didn't go to record, I would not have the amount of material that I have today.
I think our coverage was the best coverage of any newspaper in the country. The reporters and photographers went to great lengths to get news and to cover the story.
One evening, when I was in Soweto, Zingi Mkefa hostel The shops were burning there, and I was there photographing. It was about 11 p.m. I drove away past my home first before going to the office. I found my home on fire. I looked, heavy smoke coming out. I did not go in, got into the car and drove back to the office.
In the 1980s, the groundswell of internal resistance to apartheid escalated. The SABC's coverage of the 1976 uprisings set the tone and continued to characterize the broadcaster's role for the next 20 years.
Well, the SABC operated unopposed. They were a government mouthpiece, and there was no other electronic medium, either radio or television, to counter that. So it was a blatant and very significant propaganda machine. The liberal press very definitely played an enormous role in trying to counteract kind of government propaganda.
I think the fact that there were these papers saying that apartheid was wrong and that it had to go had a subconscious effect on the population generally. And I think it enabled the transition to be made in this country a lot easier than it would have been had all the papers, for instance, supported the Nationalist Party government.
Worth 1,000 words, the power of the image played a critical role in galvanizing international pressure against the apartheid regime.
Pictures were syndicated all over the world. They were not just for South Africa.
Based in London, the International Defence and Aid Fund published and distributed material that would arm anti-apartheid movements across the globe in their campaign to mobilize international pressure against the apartheid regime. By the time the student uprisings erupted in 1976, IDEF supplemented their articles with photographs as well as photographic exhibitions. These pictures ultimately sent an urgent wake-up call to the world that what was happening in South Africa was something that concerned every human being on this planet.
At IDEF, there was an opportunity to develop a stronger response through our information material by adding a visual element to it. And so I felt that the thing to do is to build a repository of images which could be used in our materials to reach out to people internationally and put to the international public the atrocities of apartheid in a very strong, uncompromising way.
These are the pictures that were shown all over the world that South Africa was on fire.
I suppose it was a collection of several hundred shots, very, very widely depicting what went on from the first days of the uprising in Soweto itself, over the year of the extended uprising throughout the country in different places. And a big exhibition was held at the United Nations. It had enormous success.
That's when they began to isolate South Africa.
There's nothing like a photograph of events in South Africa, like, for example, the Soweto events, to really turn people's emotions on. And it's really the emotional factor that we emphasized by developing photographic exhibitions and using visual materials in connection with raising international consciousness. And I suppose more than anything else, photographs became a big weapon in the hands of anti-apartheid movements and therefore in the hands of the ANC.
Peter Magubane's images are the definitive historical testimony to the watershed events of South Africa in 1976.
There isn't a single picture that I would think it is iconic. They are all iconic. They are beautiful pictures. They tell the story. You know, this is why I'm still able to tell the story to other people who were not born then. Have an exhibition to see what 76 looked like, what it was like to be a student in 1976.
Today, Peter Magubane's legacy continues. Nero Nsoma is a young photographer making waves in the new South Africa, capturing the politics of the new generation.
I attended a presentation with Peter Magubane. For the first time, I just heard like Peter Magubane, he's a photographer, he's a black person. I said like, I'm going. And I said like, this is what I like to do. I want to photograph my people like this. I want to tell stories of my people so that my generation can learn from it, so that we give something back to the other generation that's gonna come after mine. It's through Peter Magubane's work that we got to understand what was really going down in South Africa. South African history has always been about youth from the 1976, and it's the youth of now that have to be listened to. People have to listen to those voices, and we need to document that. My generation it's our responsibility to document, to not just ignore it. It's them that can only change this place to be the place that we all want it to be, a better place.
I think as far as June 16 is concerned, photographically, South Africa is rich. We were able to document our own struggle. We are glad that we are alive today and able to tell the tales of 1976. And that the children of today must embrace the democracy that was brought by the blood that flowed of those children of 1976. Those children put their heads on the block to become refugees at an early age, go to foreign countries where they were locked up because they were thought they were spies. Some died there, some were able to come back. If the people of South Africa, black and white, do not embrace the democracy that we have, then we will be a forgotten nation tomorrow.